Thank you. Thank you. Hello, my name is Sid, and I love motion. I'm a freelance creative developer and teacher from Amsterdam. I'm very excited to be here, so thank you so much for having me. When I decided to go freelance a couple of years ago, I thought this is great because I get to work from home in my pajamas, there's no one to distract me. But I soon realized that I really miss having people to talk about my work with. And I tried to do that with my friends who are actually here today. But they didn't really understand what I was talking about because they all work in healthcare and cybersecurity. So my big ploy is to get them here, so now keep paying attention. Okay, so when I was asked to become a lecturer at my alma mater, the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, I kind of jumped at that chance because not only did it force me to touch grass every once in a while, but it also meant that I got paid for talking about my passion, which is front-end development. And Comic Sans is totally fine if you use rainbow colors, by the way, just so you know. So it all kind of escalated in me rebuilding my entire portfolio with scroll-driven animations and a few transitions. And I kind of do that every year. So this is, some people join the gym at New Year's. This is what I do. And I'm already starting on next year's portfolio, which you'll get a preview from. It already looks different. So the title of this talk is a not-so-subtle reference to you might not need jQuery.com. Who's familiar with that? Cool. That was a website that was very useful in its time because it showed that you could do a lot of stuff that you could do with jQuery with just JavaScript, which is always the better option, of course. And this talk kind of does the same for JavaScript animations, but with CSS. So why should you move from JavaScript solutions to CSS animations for at least some of your animations? So JavaScript runs on the main thread, which means that it's the mystical place where browsers process user events, CSS repaints, and reflows. So that could potentially block other processes while it's being executed. And this usually doesn't happen, especially if you know what you're doing. But if it does happen, then your website can become unresponsive, which is not something you want. And also because CSS is just running in the browser, it's also more performant to do it with CSS than with a JavaScript library. So let's get into scroll-driven animations. They are currently supported in Chrome, in Edge, and in the newest version of Safari. It's not yet supported in Firefox, only behind the flag, so you can test it out as a developer, but users won't do that. But it should be by the end of the year, because it's part of this year's interop, and that's a set of agreements between browsers to implement certain features by the end of the year. So by the end of the year, you should be able to use it in the newest version of Firefox, at least. So you can do some cool things with scroll-driven animations. And because they are built on CSS animations, actually, you can easily combine them with other CSS keyframes and transitions. So this is my work-in-progress portfolio for next year. So you can see there's this CSS 3D box going on, and there's a keyframe here, and the text animates in. I love motion, did I tell you? So there's also some scroll-driven animations, because when you start scrolling, I created this variable font. I edited a font to also have a y-axis, because I thought that was cool. So I'm animating the y-axis, I'm animating this line, this box gets smaller, the background gets darker, there's just a lot of things happening. So, and it also keeps turning as long as you're scrolling, which is also kind of cool. So yeah, it will probably look completely different by the start of next year, but little preview. So scroll-driven animations are built on CSS keyframe animations, and this is a simple example of a CSS keyframe animation. I'm animating from inset 25% to an inset of 0. The name is clip in, which I reference in my keyframes. The duration is 1 second. There's a timing function of ease out, and it plays on a forwards fill mode. So this is what that looks like. So it just animates like that. And if I want to turn this into a scroll-driven animation, all I kind of need to do is change the duration property to animation timeline. And I'm writing all the animation properties out completely here because animation timeline is not supported in the animation shorthand. So I think it's clearer to just write all of them out. So in the HTML, you can see that I have an image with the class basic. I have an image with the class scroll-driven. And the basic one has just the same animation as I had before. But the scroll-driven one, I've changed the animation timeline to view. So the first one is like this, and the second one is now connected to my scroll position. So that's all you need to do to start doing scroll-driven animations. Pretty cool. So we can also add the animation range property to change the start and end values of an animation. So there's 4 named keywords. There's contain, cover, entry, and exit. And the contain range runs from when the element is completely in view until the element hits the top of the viewport. And then the cover range runs as long as the element is in view. So it starts when the element gets into view, and it ends when the element is completely out of view. So that's very useful for things like parallax animations. The entry one is very useful for appear animations, because it starts when the element starts to get in view, and it ends when the element is completely in view. And then there's the exit one, which starts as soon as the element starts to leave the viewport, and it ends when the element is completely out of view. So let's see what that looks like in code. So I've got a different kind of animation that clips from the left to the right. It's set on an animation timeline of view, and I've got the animation range property right here, so that we're going to see what that looks like. So this is the contain range, so it starts when the element is completely in view, and it ends when the element is hitting the top of the viewport. Then we have the cover range, which starts as soon as the element becomes in view, and it ends when the element has completely left the viewport. We have the entry one, entry. So that starts when it starts to become in view, and it ends when it's completely in view. And the last one is the exit one, which starts as soon as the element starts to leave the viewport, and it ends when it's completely invisible. But the cool thing about this, I kind of raged against this at first, because it's so different from how I used to do this with GSAP scroll trigger. But I've kind of got used to it, and there are some cool things, because you can actually combine these ranges. So we could start on the cover range, and we could end on the contain end range, which means that it will start as soon as the element is in view, and it will end once the element hits the top of the viewport. And you can also add any CSS unit to this that you want. So we could start it at 10%, for example. So we start at the cover 10% range. So then it starts a little bit later, but it will still end on the cover 100% range, because that's actually the default, which is a good default in my opinion. But I said we could use any CSS unit, so we could do centimeters. Cover 3 centimeters. So now we're starting at cover 1 centimeter, and we're ending at cover 3 centimeters. So that's pretty quick. The only thing that you can't do is have the end range be larger, or the start range be larger than the end range. So now start range is at 4 centimeters, the end range is at 3 centimeters, and this is what that looks like. It just flashes. Kind of makes sense when you think about it, but it's good to keep in mind. So especially if you're combining units like view width and view height, this is something that could potentially happen, so you need to think about that. You can also use the view timeline name property, and that allows you to use a different element's position for the range of your animation, kind of like a scroll trigger. So in the HTML, I have this div with a class of image with text. Inside there's an image and there's a text block, and I want to animate this h2 and paragraph, so I want to animate them, one from the top and one from the side. So what I'm going to do on the image with text selector, I'm going to set the view timeline name. And instead of using the view function that I did before in the animation timeline, I'm setting the name that I chose. So I'm choosing image with text. The animation name that I'm using is translate from. So that translates from opacity 0 to opacity 1. And I'm also animating the transform property. So the h2 comes in from above, and the paragraph comes in from the side. And as you can tell, it ends on the same, at the same time. If I would have chosen to do this with view, then you can tell that the paragraph will take a little bit longer for the animation to end. So I'm not saying this is wrong, but this, amongst other things, using a view timeline name is very useful if you want to sync different animations on different elements. So what kind of JavaScript animations can we actually replace with this? So first of all, non-essential animations. And this is a QR code to my blog that currently doesn't work because it's on Cloudflare, guys. So, but this is, I'll share my slides afterwards, and you'll be able to go to there tomorrow probably. I wrote an article about how to fall back scroll-driven animations with 2 techniques. So one was progressive enhancement, and one was graceful degradation, where I changed out the animation completely, and the one with with progressive enhancement, I just fall back with GSAP scroll trigger, so with JavaScript. It's also perfect for scrubbing animations, which are kind of animations that need to look good in any point inside of the animation. So it needs to look good at 20%, and it needs to look good at 100%, because people can stop scrolling at any moment. It's also perfect for appear animations, and especially if you want them to play every time a user scrolls by it, because it's currently not yet suitable for animations that only play once. They are working on this, but the animation will play every time you scroll past it. It's also not yet suitable for scroll-triggered animations, and they are a little bit different from scroll-driven. So scroll-driven is between 2 points, so 2 points on a page, and scroll-triggered is triggered by 1 point, but it plays on a time-based timeline. You can't do that yet, but it's coming. And it's also not possible to do things like WebGL canvas animations, because they are all in JavaScript, and this is a CSS module. So let's get on to view transitions, and they are actually supported in all major browsers as of last month. Yay! Okay, confetti, nice. But unfortunately, the add view transition rule is not yet supported in Firefox, which means that you can't yet do page transitions with it. In Firefox, you can only call a view transition with JavaScript at this moment. But hopefully, by the end of the year, we can also do page transitions. So I hope this link works. I hope I have internet. Yes, OK. So here's an example of view transitions in the wild, actually. So this is a project for a Dutch photographer. His name is Michiel Rotgans. He has a lot of nice work, and he wanted to showcase that on a website. So when you click an item, it actually becomes bigger, and it animates to the position on the detail page, which is kind of cool. But the even more cool stuff is when you go back, it animates back to the original place, which I really like. That's a view transition. Both are view transitions. Also, filtering and sorting, you can also do with view transitions. And even things like loading more animations. Also, view transition. And there's one more view transition. I kind of went a little bit crazy on this project, I'll be honest. So when you go to the next case, it actually slides. Kind of cool. OK, so view transitions are kind of a way to animate between two states. And for those who are familiar with Flip, which is an animation technique thought up by Paul Lewis, you might be a little bit more familiar. So Flip stands for first, last, invert, play. And what it kind of does is it records the start position of the elements, it then applies the end transforms, and then it inverts those transforms to make it look like it has never moved at all. And the removal of those inverted transforms is what is actually animated. And this might seem a little bit crazy, but it was much more performant to remove transforms than to add them. So that's why they did that. And it was also done in the first 100 milliseconds of when a user enters a page. So all the calculations were done at that point, which made it a lot more performance. And this kind of is also what view transitions do. So they capture the first state, they capture the second state, and they calculate the difference between the 2 points, and the API does the rest of the magic. Nice color, not my color. OK, so what happens by default when you call a view transition? It'll make a snapshot of the first state. It will take a snapshot of the second state, and it will calculate if there's any differences between transforms, sizing, and rotation. And then it will animate between those two states, and it will also crossfade. But by default, it will take a snapshot of the root element, which is the same as the HTML element, which means that both states are exactly the same size, so they won't animate. They will only crossfade. To really start doing cool stuff, we need to add individual items to the view transition pseudo elements. So to call a view transition between all your pages, which doesn't work in Firefox yet, sorry, you just add a little block of CSS, add view transition, navigation auto. And to call it with JavaScript, you just say document.start view transition, and then the thing you want to do inside, you put inside the function. So let's go to a simple example. Yes, very beautiful. This is hot pink, whose favorite HTML color is also hot pink. Do we have any hot pink lovers here? No? Yes. Thank you. Cool. OK, so let's zoom in a little bit, because we can actually see these view transitions happening in the browser, which is Cool. So if you're not familiar, in the Chrome DevTools, there's an animations drawer, which you can find if you press these 3 dots, go to More Tools, and then Animations, and it will open up this thing, which allows you to slow down animations. So now when I go to the About page, you can see the crossfade I was talking about. And when I go back to Home, crossfade. I also added a little bit more CSS to create this moving animation. So now it actually moves up. Let's see it in full speed first. So this is the animation. Let's slow it back down again. Let's go to About. And you can even pause the animation, which is very useful, because now you can see that there's a view transition pseudo element added to the HTML. And inside of that view transition pseudo element, there's a view transition group for each named item. And by default, that's only the root. You can also see that on the HTML element, there's actually a view transition name set to root. So if I would have added another view transition name to another element, for example, this title, there would be another view transition group here with the name title. So let's go inside the view transition group. Inside of the view transition group, there's an image pair, and there's a view transition old and new inside of that image pair. The group is kind of responsible for the calculations of the changing of the transform, sizing, and rotation. And the view transition old and new, you can actually see it when I select them a little bit, I think. Those represent the old state and the new state. So you can also see that it's no longer interactive. I can't click on anything. It's now actually kind of like a screenshot, but browsers prefer to call it snapshots. Don't know why. And inside, okay, the view transition old and new, they both have an animation going on. So by default, that's a fade in for the view transition new and a fade out for the view transition old. But I changed that animation to my own animation called move in. So I'm animating the new one from a translate Y of 100% to a translate Y of 0. And I'm animating the old one from translate Y 0 to translate Y minus 100%. And that's how easy it can be to do something with view transitions. So by default, you will only get a snapshot of the root element, but you can add other items. So for example, if I would have named this item and this item, then the browser knows those two are connected, so it should watch what happens to that image, and it will automatically animate it to the next state. The rest of the page will still just fade out and fade in, because it's still part of the root view transition. So here we have, I needed to change this image because it was also loaded by Cloudflare. But now you get to ask me about the fish doorbell in the break afterwards, if you want. So let's start with the HTML. I've got 2 buttons which have a style property and a CSS variable VT, and those 2 are unique. So view transition names need to be unique on the page. You can't have multiple view transition names that are the same, because that would mean that the view transitions will just stop working completely. And I'm using it in my CSS. I'm setting a view transition name with the variable that I chose. And in the JavaScript, each time I click a button, I'm going to add or remove a class expanded. And expanded will change the width from 100 pixels to 200 pixels. So that's all I'm doing. I'm not doing any other magic behind the scenes. So when I click it, it will just animate and become a little bit bigger. And it's fine to use videos within view transitions. So they are kind of more snapshots than screenshots. Anyway, so maybe browsers are right, because the videos will just keep playing during the view transition. So the old and new states of view transitions are also quite interesting, because all the transforms are happening on the group, but whether a group has a view transition old and a view transition new, it kind of depends on if the item was there before, if it was added, or if it was removed. So when you're sorting items, for example, the item will exist in the old state and it will exist in the new state. It will just be in a different order. So they will have both a view transition old and new state. So I've represented those with a red rectangle and a green rectangle. Is that visible a little bit? Okay, cool. But if you start filtering items out, then the items that you are filtering out will only have an old state, but not a new state, because they don't exist in a new state. So keep an eye on this one. That one only gets the red rectangle and not the green rectangle, because in the second state, it doesn't exist. And we can use that, I promise. There's a point to this. So when you add items back, the opposite happens. So it doesn't exist in the old state, but it does exist in the new state, so it only has a view transition new. Okay, stay with me, guys. It's going to be fine. I also needed to change this video. It's going to be a little bit weird. In this example, I didn't use the VT CSS variable, because actually when you're using view transitions on the same page, you can use match element to give every item a unique view transition name. So you don't need to add a view transition name manually to everything. I'm also setting a view transition class of item, which we're going to use in a minute. And with these buttons, I can reverse the order with a view transition. And I can also add items. More confetti, which is great. So I've got two functions, one that reverses the order and one that adds an item. And when I click a button, I'm first going to check if view transitions are supported. And I'm doing that with if document.startViewTransition. And if they are supported, I'm starting the view transition, and I'm doing the reverse order function inside of that. And if it is not supported, I'm still reversing the order. It will just not be animated. And the same thing for the add item one. So what we can do with the view transition class, for example, we can style items, can style multiple items, because otherwise I would have needed to know the individual view transition names. So with view transition class, I can style multiple items the same way. So let's do something with the view transition new on the item class, and let's check if they're an only child, which is kind of sad, but not in this case. So if it's an only child, that means that there is no view transition old state. So it will only be applicable to when I add an item. So we can change the animation for this. So let's say animation, name, scale in, and let's add some keyframes for that. So scale in, and let's go from scale 0. Sorry, this is a bit boring, watching me type. And then we're going to scale 1. Okay, we're done, we're done. So now when I add an item, it's going to scale in. But when I reverse the order, it's still doing the original animation. So this allows you to animate items that are added back by filters differently than items that were already there, which is kind of cool. Okay, sorry, which JavaScript animations can we replace with this? So page transitions, kind of, not in Firefox yet, but the defaults are great, because when view transitions are not supported between pages, it will just go to the next page, it will just not be animated. And we can also replace things that we used to do with the flip library from GSAP, so JavaScript triggered flip animations are also perfect to do with view transitions now. But it's not suitable, again, for WebGL or Canvas, because it's also a CSS module. And it's also not perfect for animations that change the content of the element, because we're kind of working with screenshots/snapshots, so it's no longer HTML, so you can't change the content of the HTML during the view transition. But let's get on to the fun stuff. This is what you've been waiting for, right? Okay, so I created a conference website, as you do. So this is we're starting with an overview of all the speakers. I've got a schedule here, and we're going to add some modern CSS techniques here, because modern CSS has a lot more to offer than just view transitions and scroll-driven animations, and I wanted to show you that. So I'm going to make this smaller, and I'm going to do some live coding, guys, so bear with me. Woo! Cool. So I'm going to start with this schedule. Let's make this a lot bigger. Is this visible? Should I turn to light mode? Okay. No. Ooh. Oof, oof, oof. All the vampires in the room are very exposed right now. All right, so the schedule header, which is this thing, I thought it would be cool to make that sticky. So I did that. And position sticky is not necessarily a new thing, but what comes after is going to be. So first thing I do, I put everything within a prefers reduced motion, no preference media query, which allows me to, which allows users that have a setting in their devices active called prefers reduced motion, that they won't see this animation. So because they probably don't want to have a big sticky thing in their face, and other people do. So let's set it to position sticky, set the top to 0, and the set index to 2 to make sure that it goes over everything. And then we have a nice sticky header. And also for day 2, also a nice sticky header. Okay. But now we're going to do some fun stuff, because who's used container queries before? I've got all the speakers on the front row. Nice, cool. So container queries are pretty cool, and now you also have container style queries, which allow you to query if a certain style is active. So we're going to set the container name to sticky heading, so this can be anything you want, and I chose sticky heading of all things. And then the container type is not something that you can just choose yourself. I set it to scroll state, because I want to check the scroll state of this item. So again, I'm wrapping it in prefers reduced motion, no preference, so people who have that setting active will not see it. And I'm creating a container style query. So I'm referencing the name that I chose, sticky heading, and I'm setting scroll state. It's so new that my editor doesn't know what this is. I'm checking if the scroll state is stuck to top. So that's a value of position sticky. And if it is stuck to the top, I'm going to transform it to a scale of 0.3, and I'm also going to add a little bit of a transition. So now, let's go back on top. When it gets stuck, it will also animate to this place. Very nice. And this one as well. Okay, next thing. So these are all details elements, which are really nice because they allow you to create like an accordion thing just using HTML. But we can also do a little bit more fun stuff with them. So I wanted to first add some scroll-driven animation. So I'm first checking if animation timeline is supported, because if animation timeline is supported, I know that scroll-driven animations are supported. So I'm creating a view animation timeline. I'm using an animation name of scale in, which scales from 0.9 to 1. And I'm setting the range to entry 10 view heights. Very specific, but it's fine. And I'm also changing the transform origin to left top. So that's actually the transform origin for all the items on the left. So all the items on the left are going to be transformed in from left top, and the ones on the right from right top, and the big ones from the center. So let's save it. And now we have a nice little scroll-driven animation. And if this animation doesn't work, it's fine, because the website is still functional. It's just a nice little enhancement. So you can definitely start using these techniques today. Let's go on to the next one, because I also want to make them sticky. I like position sticky, because as you can see, some of these workshops are actually a lot longer than the card is, so it would be nice if they are stuck to the top as long as they are inside of that container. So set it to position sticky, and I've set the top to 3.25 REM, which is exactly what I need to make it look like this. So pretty cool. Then we also, of course, want to animate how it gets bigger. Like, we want to animate that stuff. So we can do that. If you've ever done any FAQ styling where it had to be like an accordion, you probably have used max height for that. You don't have to anymore. You can actually animate from height 0 to height auto now. Crazy. And you can do that when you use interpolate size on the root. So I'm first checking if that is supported, and if it's not supported, it's just going to look like this. But if it is supported, I'm going to add some animation. So again, in the prefers reduced motion query, I'm going to add the transition. So there won't be a transition, it will just animate the height automatically if someone has prefers reduced motion on. And I'm going to hide the details content by setting height to 0 and overflow to clip. And then when it is open again, when it is has the attribute of open, I'm going to set the height to auto. Okay, get ready. Ooh. Ooh. Yes, okay, cool. And it's even cooler because it also automatically animates my grid, which I didn't expect. How cool is that? That's amazing. Okay, and also when you get to the end of the container and you want to open this, I was scared that it would go like it would jump up or something like that, but it actually, that's nice. Like if I would have done this with JavaScript, it wouldn't have looked that nice. So that's perfect. And also when you're right here, it also animates back. It's nice, nice, cool. Okay. I think we have time for one more thing. I also created, of course, this speaker overview, which I thought would be cool if we animated up from the bottom. So let's set the translate Y to 100% and then animate it up to 0. And I'm a sucker for a stagger, which I told at my workshop yesterday. But you can now actually use sibling index, which gives you the index of each item. And of course, because this is CSS, does it start with 0? No, it starts with 1. So if you get the sibling index of this item, it returns 1. And this 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to use that sibling index to create a delay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set the default delay to 0.04 seconds. And if sibling index is supported, I'm going to multiply the sibling index by 0.04 seconds. If I had known how much math I needed to do in my work, I would have paid better attention. But what this does is this adds a delay to advent of 0.04 seconds, 0.08, 0.012, 0.016, and it's going to look nice. And I'm going to use that in my animation declaration. So I'm going to say, use a stagger in animation, which animates from translate Y 100% to translate Y 0. The duration is 0.4 seconds, but I'm adding that stagger delay in there. I've added a custom ease because I'm very extra. And let's see what this looks like. So now we have this, which is cool, right? But if this doesn't work, what happens? It just does this, which is fine. This is a fine fallback. So let's start implementing very cool new CSS stuff in websites today. And let's gradually see them becoming cooler. I hope to see that more on the web. So CSS is awesome, right? Yeah. Motion on the web has come full circle. From CSS animations and transitions to JavaScript libraries, and now kind of back to CSS again, which is nice. So view transitions and scroll-driven animations can replace a lot of JavaScript animations, and using the native power of the web can make your websites, your animations more performant and even behave more similarly across browser, which is also nice. So that was it. Thank you very much.